Hello everybody, this is Kirby over yonder, and I have a soft spot for cartoons I think are underrated. Shows like Clone High, Dan Versus, and my personal favorite, Wander Over Yonder. Honestly, it's a shame this show was so underrated, because Wander Over Yonder has an episode that I consider to be one of, if not the best episodes in animation history. That episode is The Flower, and we'll be looking at it today. The episode starts off with Sylvia complaining to Wander about how Lord Dominator has destroyed every planet on the galaxy. But something's different this time. Instead of being super happy, Wander is crying. Sylvia is upset by this because it's not the norm for Wander to be sad in general, much less crying. So she shows him a flower that somehow managed to still be alive, and that cheers Wander up. Wander then tries to think of some ways to make the flower stay alive. Believe it or not, these scenes of Wander and Sylvia trying to help the flower are actually very important for the episode, because while this episode is mostly pretty serious, these scenes provide some comedy. This helps the story because the audience doesn't get bored and are able to take the ending more seriously because not the entire episode was just boring sadness. Looking at you, Bridge to Terabithia. Unfortunately, nothing they do ends up working, so they look for another planet to grow the flower on, and they find one. But unfortunately, they are surrounded by Lord Dominator. Wander and Sylvia then run away, while Lord Dominator is firing lasers at them. While this happens, the flower's pollen spreads all over the other planets. Eventually, Dominator corners them, and I've gotta say, they did a fantastic job making Dominator seem like a very threatening villain. Just the way she stands over them and mocks them and talks about how she revels in causing them misery. I'd honestly argue that this is her best moment in the entire series. The flower's pollen ends up spraying Dominator in the face, and she gets tickled while Wander and Sylvia run off. Some people may think this is kind of a cop-out, but I'll explain why it works later in the video. Unfortunately, the flower has now died, and Sylvia thinks that because of this, Wander has given up hope. But Wander explains to her that just because he's sad doesn't mean that all hope is lost. This message is the most powerful part of the episode. Grieving is something that we've all been through before. That feeling we get when a loved one dies or something gets ruined. This episode is saying that it's okay to feel sad. It's okay to feel unhappy. It's okay to not feel good when something bad happens. And just because you do feel bad doesn't mean you've given up hope or you'll be sad forever. Being sad is a natural emotion. Everyone experiences it. And, well, we can learn from it. When we're sad, we can learn what to do differently, or how to prevent us from being sad, or just to reflect on what we've done. This episode conveys that message pretty much perfectly. So what's left of the flower turns into pollen, which covers the destroyed planet, thus making new planets. Now, there is one more thing I want to say about this episode, but first, I'm going to recap everything else that's good about it. The animation was really beautiful, the message was fantastic, Lord Dominator was a really threatening villain, the comedy was amusing at worst, and the episode does a really good job balancing the humor with the story. Also, one last thing I'd like to add is that this entire episode is pretty much a metaphor for hope. When the flower gets worse, Wander gets sadder and loses hope. When the flower gets better, Wander gains hope. When the flower sprayed pollen at Lord Dominator, it was pretty much saying that hope can defeat the worst of villains. When the flower spread its pollen all around the planets, it was a message for spreading hope. It's honestly amazing how the writers were able to fit in this deep message into a kids show, and you don't even need to get the metaphor to be able to like the episode. You can still enjoy it as a really heartwarming episode. So that was The Flower, my favorite cartoon episode of all time. I definitely recommend you watch this episode, especially if you're one of those people who think that Wander Over Yonder is just a dumb show for kids. Please watch this episode. It is a masterpiece from beginning to end. Kirby out.